Good morning and welcome to the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness local applicant briefing for the Emergency Solutions Grant fiscal year 23-24 request for funding applications. My name is Rachel Waltz. I'm the manager of the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. Thanks for being here. First, we're going to start with a brief outline of the Emergency Solutions Grant funding and how it moves from HUD through the state of North Carolina and into programs operating within the Orange County continuum of care. Then we'll talk about the local process and timeline for Orange County applicants, and then we'll end with any questions that you may have. So first, to get started, there are two main sources of federal homeless funding across the United States: the Continuum of Care funds and the Emergency Solutions Grant funds. In fiscal year 2022, just under $1 million came into Orange County from these two sources of funds. You'll see back in 2020 into 2021, there was this pretty significant increase due to COVID-related funding increases. Those Emergency Solutions Grant COVID funds have now been exhausted at the local level and also mostly across the nation as well. And so we're reverting back to kind of the new normal of Continuum of Care funds and Emergency Solutions Grant annual funds. So with those two pots of funding, how the communities choose to spend those pots is really determined at the local level. So there are certain eligible uses that are really designed to meet the statutory requirements of each of those pots of funding. So within the Continuum of Care funds, eligible uses are programs that provide rental assistance and supportive services like permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, as well as HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System, which is a requirement of programs that are receiving Continuum of Care or Emergency Solutions Grant funding, with the exception of domestic violence service providers. They are required to use a DV comparable database. Additionally, prevention is allowable for certain eligible populations, with permission from HUD for high-performing communities. And then two other eligible uses are coordinated entry, which really operates as the front door to the homeless service system, and planning efforts. The Continuum of Care is required to plan and implement a systematic approach to ending homelessness. And so those Continuum of Care planning funds are only for the entity that is performing as the COC lead agency. In Orange County, we currently have Continuum of Care funds in use for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, as well as coordinated entry and, of course, COC planning. We're talking more specifically today about the Emergency Solutions Grant, and that is designed to fund both the crisis response as well as housing stabilization activities. So crisis response could be things like emergency shelter or street outreach, and housing stability could fund things like rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention. Again, Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, is also an eligible use of these funds, as is administrative costs. And we do not currently fund HMIS or administration with the Emergency Solutions Grant allotment that comes into Orange County. So this year continues to be kind of a return to normal with two grant cycles. So one through the ESG, or Emergency Solutions Grant, and one that is the Continuum of Care funds. And so the ESG request for applications is open now. We'll talk more about the timeline shortly. The Continuum of Care 23-24 application, or the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, we're expecting to be released in the next couple of weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, HUD block grants emergency solutions funding to larger communities and to the state. There is no ESG entitlement in Orange County. I believe there are 6 other locations that are entitlement communities, and those do tend to be kind of more populous areas like Wake County and Mecklenburg, Guilford, Durham, and a few others. And so as a result, Orange County is a subrecipient of Emergency Solutions Grant funds from the state ESG office. And the state ESG office receives those ESG funds from HUD. We are required by the state office to maintain a local process to determine priorities and recommend funded projects, similar to how we do for the Continuum of Care funds. So the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness has a number of functions. We first and foremost serve as the continuum of care, or that organizing entity for the entirety of Orange County. So that includes the towns of Chapel Hill, Carborough, Hillsborough, and those other unincorporated areas across Orange County. We are funded through an interlocal funding agreement with the 3 towns and the county, and our administrative home is Orange County government. So the continuum of care work really is around having a coordinated and systematic response to ending homelessness. So coordinating funding that's really tied to local priorities and needs, having a lot of ongoing coordination, developing a plan to end homelessness, maintaining a gaps analysis, having written standards for coordinated entry and for HUD-funded programs across the community. And then starting in the spring of 2020, the Partnership to End Homelessness started to add direct service work, initially with coordinated entry through the Orange County Housing Helpline, and the building up a rapid rehousing team, also street outreach, harm reduction, and deflection, which is co-managed between the Partnership to End Homelessness and the Criminal Justice Resource Department, a housing access coordinator focusing on system-level landlord recruitment retention issues, and a housing locator to provide some of that individualized housing search assistance for community members who don't otherwise have a kind of lead service provider. And then more recently, SOAR, or Social Security Outreach, Access and Recovery, which is really effective intervention to fast track the Social Security disability process for people experiencing homelessness. So Orange County has applied for Continuum of Care and ESG funding starting back in 2019 for those direct service programs. The Partnership to End Homelessness has made use of those Continuum of Care planning grants for that coordination work from 2013 up into the present. So we've got here just a listing of funding sources for some of those direct service programs. You'll see that the partnership is continuing to use local funding for things like the Housing Access Coordinator and Housing Locator. Again, those are non-HUD homeless eligible costs or programs, using local funding and the home tenant-based rental assistance for rapid rehousing, using Continuum of Care funds for coordinated entry and rapid rehousing, using ESG annual funds for rapid rehousing. And then the community wound down its use of the Emergency Solutions Grant COVID funds, wrapping up street outreach a couple years back, rapid rehousing last fall, and then homelessness prevention just this spring. So if we're to now move into the local process and timeline for these Emergency Solutions Grant funds, first and foremost, y'all should have received notification of the request for applications on June 6th, in which the partnership shared out that $101,534 is available for use in Orange County. Again, we talked earlier about how that's Emergency Solutions Grant funds are really designed to have a split purpose of both having an immediate response to the crisis of homelessness, but also having an emphasis on quickly stabilizing someone back into permanent housing. And so that's where HUD tells us that no more than 60% of the funds available can be used for crisis response, things like street outreach, emergency shelter operations, and emergency shelter services. and no less than 40% of those funds can be used for housing stabilization activities, things like rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Again, there are two other eligible categories of activities for this that's eligible for this $101,000. That's the Homeless Management Information System, or again, that HUD required database, and administration fund costs for local sponsors and local units of government. So the partnership sent out information to stakeholders, both with a background and general information about Emergency Solutions Grant funds, eligible uses, as well as a bit of information about the Project Review Committee. And we'll talk a little bit more shortly about the role of the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness Project Review Committee, as well as the leadership team, and how those two groups work together in concert to develop funding recommendations. And then also the partnership shared out the local timeline in this information that was emailed across various email lists, circulated via Facebook, I believe sent out on Twitter as well. So both the partnership's leadership team, which operates as our board of directors really, and the Project Review Committee are involved. So the Project Review Committee is tasked with reviewing applications, developing the scorecard that's used for the competitions, and developing recommendations to the leadership team. The leadership team, which is comprised of a cross-section of stakeholders, service providers, people with lived expertise of homelessness in the Orange County system, make the ultimate determination on recommending funding to the State Emergency Solutions Grant Office. So the work is currently underway for the Emergency Solutions Grant request for applications, and this work will continue through the summer. So as I mentioned, local competition information was sent out to service providers in the community back on Tuesday, June 6th. Last week, the state ESG office held instructional sessions and Q&As, and fairly new for the state office has started offering special instructional sessions for new applicants. Again, we really welcome new folks who are interested in joining this work, because it really does take community-wide effort. Right now on Wednesday, June 26th, we're hosting the Orange County Local Applicant Briefing, and project applications are due on Tuesday, July 11th by 12 noon. Those will be emailed to me, and again, we'll link to some of those resources a little bit later in this presentation. So then for the next week and a half, the Project Review Committee works individually reviewing project applications and supporting material to score those project applications. And then we'll be meeting on Monday, July 24th to formulate funding recommendations. Again, those funding recommendations are then considered by the partnership's leadership team to determine funding recommendations that ultimately get submitted to the state office. And then the partnership sends the community application, or what's called the regional app, for the continuum of care, and project applicants submit your project applications via a Smartsheet link. And all of those things need to be received by the state ESG office on Monday, no later than Monday, August 21st. So after project applicants submit applications to the partnership, the work continues. So after the Project Review Committee and staff review applications, provide some scoring, and again, we'll talk about the scorecard in just a moment. We may request changes to the application itself for clarity or consistency. In order to balance funding or priorities, the Project Review Committee may request funding amount changes. And then once all of the application changes are complete, the Project Review Committee will request that agencies submit those project applications and supporting documents in the Smartsheet link that will be provided a bit later in the process. And the community application scoring considers only what's submitted by the deadline of Tuesday, July 11th at 12 noon. So what to submit and how. We have here linked a instructional item that we'll review in just a moment when we're also looking at the scorecard. And then also do want to just kind of draw folks' attention that the documents that are required by the State Emergency Solutions Grant Office vary a bit by organization type. So nonprofit applicants submit one set of required documents, and units of local government submit from that same list, but a smaller number of items, just because the organizational structure is just a bit different. Do want to note appeals. So continuum of care staff will provide written confirmation delivered via email of the leadership team's funding recommendations on the next business day following the leadership team's funding meeting. Applicants may appeal the funding recommendation by submitting an appeal in writing to COC staff no later than 7 days following that funding notification. And when staff provide written confirmation of that funding recommendation, we'll provide a bit more kind of specific detail about how to submit an appeal. And of course, project applicants or potential project applicants are always welcome to reach out to me, and I'll have my contact information a bit later on in the presentation. So we'll move next into the rating and ranking tool. And we'll preview here how to navigate to that tool itself. So if we go to the Partnership to End Homelessness website, so ocpehnc.com, navigate to the Funding tab, and then the Emergency Solutions Grant tab. We've got all of our links and documents, an overview here. So we are going to navigate first down to the scorecard. And then once we finish up a review of the scorecard, we will review applicant instructions and go from there. So the scorecard itself, I'll make this a bit bigger for my friends here. So we have here the scorecard, which is broken down by threshold elements, meaning that they are required as kind of a bare minimum that programs need to meet, as well as pointed elements. And we'll move through those first. Also, for different types of projects, there are different metrics required to meet either those threshold or pointed elements. So most of these have been fairly consistent, and so I've noted here changes that may be new for the 23-24 competition. We have here who is scoring each of these elements. So it's either the project review committee or continuum of care staff. We have how that information is supplied or received, and then the rubric of how an element is considered to be met. So most of these so far have not changed. Those lighter green elements under the applicant supplied information, agencies are welcome to submit information or context, but it's not required. For these darker green elements, project applicants are asked to explain in 2 or 3 sentences how the agency meets this metric. This element was new for last year, actually, that project services are aligned with the Housing First system orientation, and that the agency agrees to provide staff support to participate in a cross-continuum of care monitoring pilot. So again, looking to see that applicants provide a bit of context into how they met that metric for this year, or how they would plan to meet it if they were not current participants in fiscal year 22-23, but would like to become participants in following years. Note of clarification here, typically for HUD homeless projects, HUD requires a 25% match of either eligible cash or in-kind match support for the Emergency Solutions Grant opportunity. The state of North Carolina meets the match for these projects. So nothing is required for this element here. We're very appreciative to the state of North Carolina for that support. One element that is, we're asking for a bit more clarification for this element for this year is one of our HUD required elements is that projects have reasonable costs per permanent housing exit. And the project review committee is requesting that applicants describe other funding sources and amounts that help cover program costs. Again, HUD's homeless programs really look to provide gap funding. They do not intend to provide the entirety of funding support for homeless services and homeless programs. And so we're asking that applicants describe the amount and source of other funding for things like rental assistance, supportive services, and or program operations for proposed projects. No changes with the feasibility, that applicants are active participants in the continuum of care, and no changes to the need for an acceptable organizational and financial review. Project review committee members have both added that agencies apply a racial equity lens to homeless services and housing, as now it was previously just a pointed element. This is now considered a threshold element as well, so really a requirement, and have provided, allowed project applicants 3 to 5 sentences to explain how your agency is meeting this metric. Additionally, the project review committee has broken out a representation of people with lived expertise from this element and has moved it to its standalone scoring element. Again, on the element, the different element of whether an agency is increasing knowledge base on racial equity, this retains its pointed scoring mechanism, but is also added as a threshold measure as well. So again, really a requirement that agencies are demonstrating how they're increasing the knowledge base on racial equity. And then new for this year, as a standalone item, is that an agency has people with lived experience of homelessness in decision-making positions. And it's added as a pointed element for now, so 10 points. And agencies are asked to explain in 2 to 3 sentences how your agency meets this metric, or provide a board of directors roster or survey with results demonstrating representation. No changes here to the project entries from coordinated entry. Applicants are asked to explain in 2 or 3 sentences how your program conforms or plans to conform to the continuum of care written standards. And again, you can find those on the partnership's website. No further changes to financial stability or experience of the applicant working with people in housing crises or providing housing focused services. No changes to these next couple of items. Again, asking that project applicants describe in a few sentences how you have experience effectively utilizing public funds, have a demonstrated understanding of client needs, making sure that the program design and service delivery plan are really a good match and meet the client needs of folks that you are serving. And that your project connects clients to mainstream benefits. Again, really trying to integrate homeless services from instead of being this thing out over here, but to really better integrated with mainstream supports and other entitlements that are designed kind of universally, not just exclusively for people experiencing homelessness. Got our next item, really looking to address barriers to program participation, really to ensure that the voices and perspectives of people that your programs are serving is reflected in the program delivery as well. All right. The next couple, no changes there. The next element that has a change is a longstanding threshold for renewal projects, asking that projects have high HMIS data quality. The project review committee, in review of data quality across HUD-funded projects, has really made a caveat this year, allowing for errors related to Social Security numbers to be subtracted from the overall data error rate. So if project applicants are declining to share their Social Security numbers, we want to make sure that that information is not a ding or have a negative impact for projects that are otherwise meeting the data quality measures. Let's see. The next element here that has had a bit of a change is really looking to see that for both project stayers and project leavers, that for permanent supportive housing participants and rapid rehousing participants, that there is an increase in non-employment income from 8% to 10%. So that means of the total number of project participants, that at least 10% of participants are seeing increases in non-employment income. We know that income doesn't necessarily need to be earned income, but income is really one of the key stabilizers for a lot of households. And permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing oftentimes has a number of years to work with a household to help secure additional income. So whether that's cost of living increases, access to new entitlements, using programs like SOAR to obtain Social Security disability. So that's where you'll see two new changes there, from 8% to 10% for project leavers and project stayers in rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. Another change I'd like to highlight here is we added a bit of specificity to the number of days from project entry to move in for homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. We changed the metric here from the average number of days that it takes to move in to the median number, because we do know that there are outliers out there. The longer that it takes for someone to get connected with rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, oftentimes the harder it is to develop rapport, really kind of engage someone in kind of joining on a housing search plan. So we wanted to ensure that that project performance was really rooted around kind of the midpoint rather than getting pulled out by by some outliers. We made some similar moves with the length of time that someone has served in a program like emergency shelter, transitional housing, and street outreach. And so again, we made the move from average time to a median time. And so looking to see decreases in median time year over year. So if it took, if someone was in emergency shelter, if the median time in emergency shelter was 180 days last year and 170 days this year, then that meets the measure. And we also decided to split out. We know that there are some significant differences at times for households that are adult only compared to households that involve families with children. And so the project review committee has approved splitting those populations out just to have a greater look at those decreases over time. And again, we've got our total points available. And so for new projects that are applying for Emergency Solutions Grant funds for the first time, or programs that were not funded last year, there are a total of 140 points available. For renewal projects, because there's a lot more of those kind of performance elements, because we've got that track record, there are 230 points available for emergency shelter and transitional housing. There are 180 points available for street outreach, 220 points available for homelessness prevention, 230 points available for permanent supportive housing, and 230 points available for rapid rehousing. Again, as a reminder, the only project types that are eligible for Emergency Solutions Grant funding is emergency shelter and street outreach under that emergency response portion, and homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing in that housing stabilization portion of the grant. And when we look at how projects score based on the scorecard, we're really looking at the percentage of maximum points available to really try to compare apples to apples. So that if a street outreach project, for example, scored 170 out of 180 points, that's, can't do math in my head right now, but that's close to about 95% of points available. Whereas if a rapid rehousing project scored 160 out of 230 points, that would be closer to about a 65% score. So that is the scorecard. I'm going to move back now to the applicant instructions. So this was that list that I was referring to a bit earlier. Let me give this a little bit bigger. For nonprofit applicants, we are asking that applicants submit the Emergency Solutions Grant FY23-24 project application, which is linked on the partnership's funding page, and that is both completed and signed by someone with signatory authority. That you're submitting your project budget worksheet that is found on the ESG website that is also linked through the partnership. And that you're submitting your current year's operating budget with revenue and expenditures for the entire organization, not just your ESG program. The COC participation and coordination agreement form is to be completed by COC staff ahead of that July 11th deadline. So you can feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions, and I will submit that to applicants who have expressed interest prior to that deadline. Applicants are also asked to submit an organizational chart for the entire organization, again, not just the ESG program, as well as a board of directors information form indicating name, contact info, board position, whether someone is an officer or as in a committee leadership position, term, employer or occupation, and then representing identities, including race or gender or lived experience or professional skills that really add to the capacity of your organization's leadership. Asking that applicants submit an organizational audit of the most recent closed fiscal year with management letter, or the most recent 990 if you have not had an audit. Your ESG program operations guidelines or your program manual. And again, you only need to submit your ESG program manual for project types that you're applying for. So for example, if you're just applying for emergency shelter, you don't need to have an exhaustive program manual that includes street outreach and rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Please submit any HUD corrective action plans, if any, from any corrective action that HUD would have required for Emergency Solutions Grant or Continuum of Care Grant in calendar year 2022. Anything older than that, the ESG office already has. Any corrective action plans you may have been required to undergo through the city or county or the Continuum of Care. And then the State Department of Health and Human Services requires a number of contract certification forms, including the No Overdue Taxes certification form, the annual IRS tax exemption verification form, the annual conflict of interest verification, conflict of interest policy, current certificate of insurance, IRS tax exemptions letter, and the substitute W-9. You're also requested to submit your organization's financial policies, your shelter habitability inspection that occurred no earlier than July 2023, your completed COC scorecard that we just reviewed a minute ago, spending documentation from the state ESG office for your most recent ESG annual grant. So for most applicants, that would be your FY22 grant. And then HMIS reports from January 1, 2023 through May 30th, 2023 for each ESG funded project. I've got some contact info at the next page if you have questions on either your spending documentation and your HMIS reports. For applicants that are units of local government, you are asked to submit your ESG FY project application signed and completed, the project budget worksheet. Again, the COC participation and coordination agreement is completed by continuum of care staff. Your ESG program operations guidelines or manual, any corrective action plans from HUD or the COC. The big difference really is that the State Department of Health and Human Services just requires the substitute W-9 for its contract certification. Also, organizations' financial policies, if the unit of local government is applying for emergency shelter, that you are submitting the shelter habitability inspection that occurred no earlier than July 2023. The completed COC scorecard, spending documentation from the state ESG office, and the CAPER and APR for each ESG funded project from January 1st, 2023 through May 30th, 2023. Again, you can contact the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness Data Center at HMIS@ncceh.org with questions about those HMIS reports, or the state ESG office at ncesg@dhhs.nc.gov with questions about your spending reports. I'm going to move my screen slightly again and get us back to the PowerPoint. So we just reviewed the scorecard, or rating and ranking tool, the applicant instructions. I am always happy to be supportive and hear for you and talk through things, local needs and priorities, questions you may have about the local process or applications. And if I don't know answers, I'm happy to try to point you in the right direction for folks who may. And I can be reached at rwaltz@orangecounty.nc.gov, or at the desk phone at 919-245-2496, or my work cell 919-895-0147. Thank you for your time and interest in the Emergency Solutions Grant request for applications in the Chapel Hill Orange County Continuum of Care. I'm going to take us off recording now to see if there's any other interest or questions.